The royal herald's voice cracked across 40,000 silent throats the moment the iron doors groaned open. "Bring forth the human." Marcus Ree did not stumble when the guards shoved him onto the black sand of the hollow crown. He did not raise his hands in surrender, did not search the crowd for mercy, did not do any of the things 11 decades of Velkhari conquest had trained their empire to expect from a captured species. He simply stood, rolling tension out of his shoulders, and looked up at the colossal stone amphitheater rising around him like the ribs of some long-dead god. 40,000 violet eyes stared down at him. Torches lined the upper galleries, their flames bending sideways in a wind that smelled of old blood and older stone. Above it all, on a balcony carved from black marble, sat Princess Sela Vorn, heir to the Velkhari throne, draped in silver ceremonial robes that caught the torchlight like captured starlight. She had been told humans wept before violence. She had been told they begged. Marcus Ree did neither. Is this truly the creature that humiliated 3 border garrisons before capture? General Drathos Kale's voice rolled out from the royal box, dripping with theatrical disdain as he gestured toward the lone figure below. "He looks like he is waiting for transport to arrive." Laughter rippled through the gallery, brittle and forced, the kind of laughter that comes from people trying to convince themselves they are not afraid. Sela did not laugh. Something in the human stillness unsettled her in a way she could not yet name, a wrongness sitting just beneath the surface of the moment, like a held breath before a scream. "Behold," the herald continued, voice amplified through ancient crystal resonators embedded in the arena's bones, "the Empire grants this human 3 trials: beast, hunter, royal guard. Should he survive until the final horn, his life and his freedom shall be restored, as decreed by 10,000 years of unbroken tradition." No champion, alien or otherwise, had survived all 3 trials in living memory. Marcus exhaled slowly, watching his breath fog in the arena's frigid air. They had stripped him of armor, of weapons, of anything resembling the tools his captors associated with violence. They had left him only a gray prisoner's jumpsuit and a pair of boots that had crossed 1,000 miles of Earth's ruined wilderness long before they ever touched alien soil. "No weapon," Marcus murmured, flexing his fingers, testing the emptiness of his hands like a man checking his pockets out of habit. "Good, weapons make noise. Noise gets you killed." The nearest guard frowned, uncertain whether the prisoner had just made a joke at his own execution. The first horn sounded, low and resonant enough to rattle dust loose from stone that had stood since before the Velkhari learned to fly. The ground trembled. From the eastern gate emerged the Dravok, a 6-legged predator the size of a troop transport, hide the color of dried arterial blood, jaw lined with 3 rows of serrated teeth engineered by evolution to tear through duraplate armor as easily as flesh. The crowd surged upright, screaming approval, because the Dravok had ended 11 championship bids in the previous cycle alone, and none of those endings had been quick. Marcus did not run. He dropped low instead, palms pressing flat against cold black sand, eyes tracking the beast's gait, the rhythm of its 6 legs, the slight favoring of its left foreleg, that no Velkhari hunter in 1,000 years had ever bothered to notice because no Velkhari hunter had ever needed patience to win. "Run, you fool!" Drathos shouted uselessly from the box, his words swallowed beneath the crowd's roar. "Even our finest warriors flee from a Dravok." The beast charged, sand erupting beneath its claws, momentum building into something that should have ended a man's life in under 3 seconds. At the final possible heartbeat, Marcus moved sideways, not away from the Dravok, but into the dead space beneath its swinging skull, the one place its momentum and mass made retaliation impossible. He drove upward into the thin, unarmored ridge between its front legs, using the creature's own forward momentum to multiply the force of the blow. The Dravok shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, stumbling in confusion at an attack pattern 10,000 years of arena tradition had never prepared it to anticipate. The crowd's roar died into stunned silence. Marcus was already circling, watching the wound, watching the way the beast favored its injured side now, watching for the half-second hesitation before each subsequent charge. "He is studying it," Sela whispered, leaning forward over the balcony rail despite herself. "He is not fighting it. He is learning it." "Luck!" Drathos snapped, though sweat had begun beading along the ridges of his brow. "Nothing more than luck." The second charge ended the same way. The third as well. Each time, Marcus read the rhythm a fraction faster, struck the same weakness a fraction harder, until the great predator that had killed 11 champions collapsed onto bloodied sand, defeated by a creature wielding nothing but patience and the willingness to be underestimated. Marcus stood over the dying beast, chest rising and falling steadily, and crouched beside its massive skull. "You did not need to die for their entertainment," he said quietly, the words swallowed by distance but visible in the slow movement of his lips. "I am sorry they made us do this to each other." No champion had ever shown mercy to a defeated beast. No champion had ever spoken gentleness into the ear of something they had just killed. Sayla's hand tightened on the marble rail hard enough to ache. Whispers spread through the royal box like spreading fire. "This changes nothing," Drathos insisted, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "The second trial will finish what the first could not." The second horn rang out, sharper, more urgent. 12 Velkhari arena hunters poured from the western gate, elite veterans armored in humming personal shields, energy blades crackling blue-white in the torchlight. These were not beasts driven by instinct. These were trained killers who had spent entire lifetimes mastering the Hollow Crown's brutal art, men who had buried 100 opponents beneath this same black sand. They spread into a hunting formation, surrounding Marcus from every angle with practiced, mechanical precision. Marcus smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible from the distant balcony, but Sayla saw it, and something cold settled into the pit of her stomach, a feeling she would later struggle to describe as anything other than the precise moment she understood the Empire had made a catastrophic miscalculation. "Take him slowly," the lead hunter ordered, blade igniting with a low, hungry hum. "Let the crowd savor it." Marcus did not wait for them to finish closing the circle. He moved toward a crumbling stone pillar near the arena's edge, remnant of some forgotten older structure half swallowed by black sand, and let the hunter's own confidence become the weapon that broke their formation. 2 hunters collided, trying to flank him through the narrow gap between stone and shadow. He used their confusion the way a current uses a riverbed, ducking beneath a wild slash, driving his elbow into an exposed throat joint before the hunter's body had even finished falling. "Impossible," Drathos breathed, rising halfway from his seat. "He has no training in any of our combat forms." "He is not using your forms," Sayla said softly, the realization settling over her like ice water. "He is using your arena against you, your own pillars, your own shadows, your own architecture, built across 10,000 years to entertain crowds, and now turned into a hunting ground." One by one the hunters fell, not through superior strength but through a predator's understanding of space and timing the Velkhari had simply never needed to develop. Their world had no true predators left to teach such lessons. Their warriors trained against simulations with rules, against expected patterns, against opponents who fought the way the Empire expected opponents to fight. Marcus Ree had grown up somewhere the rules broke centuries ago, somewhere survival meant learning to track, to wait, to vanish into stillness until exactly the right moment arrived. By the time the second horn sounded the trial's end, 9 hunters lay broken or unconscious across bloodied sand. 3 had fled through the western gate entirely, their pride shattered beyond any repair tradition could offer. The crowd did not cheer this time. The crowd sat in a silence so complete it felt like the entire amphitheater had forgotten how to breathe. Marcus stood alone in the arena's center, blood trailing from a shallow cut along his forearm, and lifted his gaze toward the royal balcony. For one impossible moment his eyes met Princess Salavorn's across the vast stone distance separating them, and neither looked away. He no longer looked like prey. He looked like something the Velkhari Empire had never once encountered in 10,000 years of conquest across 100 subjugated worlds. He looked like a hunter who had finally found an opponent worth all his patience. "Release the royal guard," Drathos shouted, voice cracking with poorly concealed panic. "Release everything we have left." Sayla rose from her throne so quickly her silver robes nearly tangled beneath her, a terrible understanding crystallizing in her chest. The royal guard existed for one purpose only, a purpose that had nothing to do with arena entertainment. They were the Empire's true weapon, ancient biomechanical warriors capable of leveling cities in hours. Deploying them against a single unarmed prisoner was not justice. It was a confession. "Wait," she said, though her voice drowned beneath the crowd's confused, swelling roar. "This is not within the trial's law." The western gate began its slow, grinding ascent, revealing shapes far larger and far more dangerous than anything that had come before. Sayla's breath caught in her throat as she finally understood the desperate, fatal decision her father's general had just made in front of 40,000 witnesses. Marcus turned to face the new threat, studying it with the same patient stillness he had shown the Drevok. the same calm focus he had shown 12 trained killers. But this time something shifted behind his eyes, something that almost resembled satisfaction. "Finally," he murmured, low enough that only the wind carried his words upward, toward a princess who understood, with sudden and absolute clarity, that her empire had never trapped a desperate animal inside the hollow crown. They had handed a predator exactly what he had been waiting for since the moment the iron doors first opened. Sayla rose fully from her throne, silver robes catching torchlight like falling stars, and screamed across the entire silent arena with everything her voice could carry. "Stop!" But the gate was already open, and it was already far too late. The gate did not simply open, it tore upward into the ceiling stone with a shriek of ancient machinery, releasing a wave of frozen mist that rolled across the black sand like something alive and hungry. Through that mist emerged 4 towering shapes, each 9 feet of biomechanical armor fused directly into living flesh, eyes glowing the dull red of dying stars. The Royal Guard. 40,000 Velkari fell silent at once, because every soul in that amphitheater understood exactly what those 4 warriors represented. They were not arena spectacle. They were the Empire's final answer to threats too dangerous for negotiation, weapons that had not been deployed in 3 full generations. "Drathos, what have you done?" Sayla whispered, knuckles whitening against the marble rail. "These trials demand beasts and hunters, not the guard. This violates 10,000 years of sacred law." "The law protects ordinary champions," Drathos said, voice trembling despite his effort at composure. "This human is no longer ordinary. Extraordinary threats demand extraordinary measures, Princess, regardless of what tradition prefers." On the black sand below, Marcus studied the approaching giants with the same unhurried stillness he had shown every threat before them. A muscle flexed once along his jaw, the only outward crack in his composure. "4 against 1, he murmured. "Now that's just embarrassing for you." The lead guard's voice boomed through a vocal modulator built into his armored throat. "Human, kneel. Your trial ends in mercy or it ends in ruin. Choose now." "I've heard that offer before," Marcus said, his voice carrying clean and steady across the suddenly silent arena. "Different planet, different monsters wearing different armor. I didn't kneel then either." Sayla leaned forward, something in those words landing deeper than she expected. Different planet, different monsters. This was not the first time humanity had stood inside an arena built by something convinced of its own absolute superiority. The first guard charged, and the ground itself seemed to flinch beneath his weight. Marcus did not retreat into open sand, where superior reach and raw mass would eventually corner him without mercy. Instead, he moved toward the broken pillar that had already saved him twice, using its narrow shadow to deny the guards a clean angle of attack. The lead guard's blade came down where Marcus had stood half a heartbeat earlier, shattering ancient stone instead of bone and marrow. "He repeats the same trick," Drathos snarled, gripping the balcony rail. "Predictable. Exploitable." "No," Soleil said quietly, watching the subtle shift of Marcus's weight, the way his eyes tracked not the blade but the shoulder that preceded every swing. "He is teaching us how he fights. Then he changes the entire lesson the instant we believe we finally understand it." She was right. When the second guard attempted the identical pillar maneuver moments later, Marcus had already abandoned the position entirely, drawing both remaining guards into open pursuit, forcing armored bodies never designed for sustained speed to burn themselves exhausted across distance. By the time a third guard finally closed the gap, his breathing had turned audible even through his armor's vocal modulator, ragged and uneven. Marcus ducked beneath a wild, fatigue-slowed swing and drove his palm upward into a narrow seam where helmet met throat, a structural weakness no champion in 10,000 years had ever bothered identifying, because no champion had ever possessed the patience to spend 4 hours simply watching before deciding the answer was worth the risk of dying to confirm it. The guard collapsed, armor sparking violently, internal systems failing in a cascade of dying light. 2 remained, then 1 as Marcus turned their own coordinated pursuit against them, letting momentum carry over extended bodies into each other near the arena's collapsed eastern wall, stone and metal crashing together in a sound like the world ending. The crowd that had sat frozen now rose to its feet, not screaming for blood this time, but murmuring in something far closer to disbelief, the particular silence of 40,000 people watching history rewrite itself in real time. "This is not possible," Drathos said, backing away from the balcony's edge as though distance might somehow undo what his own eyes had witnessed. "He should be dead. He should have died within the first 3 seconds. He was never going to die, Sayla said, and for the first time since the trial began, something other than fear settled into her chest, something dangerously close to awe. You did not send a victim into this arena, General. You sent prey into a hunting ground designed by predators who have never once encountered something more patient than themselves. The final guard, the same one who had first demanded Marcus kneel, stood alone among the wreckage of his fallen brothers. He raised his remaining blade, energy crackling along its fractured edge, and let out a sound that was half battle roar, half desperate fury. You cannot be human, he snarled. No human survives this. You're right, Marcus said, circling slowly despite the exhaustion now visible in his ragged breathing. Most humans you would have met before today didn't survive things like this. The ones who did survive stopped being most humans a very long time ago. He closed the distance without waiting for the guard to strike first, moving with a speed that surprised even Sayla, who had spent the entire trial believing she finally understood this strange creature's rhythm. The fight that followed lasted only seconds, brutal and close, a blade scraping past his shoulder near enough to draw fresh blood, his own counter-landing with precision earned across every previous encounter, every silent lesson the arena had unknowingly taught him about Valkyrie weakness. When it ended, the final guard knelt in the sand, weapon shattered, chest plate cracked open, defeated but breathing. Marcus stood over him and did not finish the kill. Why? The guard rasped, genuine confusion cutting through his pain. Why spare me? I would not have spared you. I know, Marcus said simply. That's exactly why I am. A silence fell across the entire amphitheater, so complete it felt sacred. Salah descended from her balcony before her own attending guards could stop her, moving through stunned nobles and frozen crowds, until she stood at the arena's edge, looking down at the man who had just dismantled her empire's deadliest weapon using nothing but patience and the willingness to be underestimated. 3 trials, she called down, her voice steady now, carrying an authority she had never fully claimed before this exact moment. Ancient law demands 3, no more. General Drathos broke 10,000 years of sacred precedent the instant he deployed the royal guard beyond the trial's sanctioned limits. This contest is finished. The human has won. Princess, you cannot simply. Drathos began, descending toward the sand himself, fury replacing his earlier panic. I am heir to this throne, Sayla said, cutting him off with a coldness that silenced the gallery completely. And you have humiliated our empire in front of 40,000 witnesses by cheating against an opponent you swore would never require cheating to defeat. Explain to me, General, precisely how that reflects upon Valkyrie honor. Drathos opened his mouth, found no answer worth the air it would cost him, and said nothing at all. Sayla turned back toward the arena floor, toward Marcus Ree, who watched her with cautious, exhausted eyes, uncertain whether this sudden reversal meant freedom or simply a different shape of trap. Why did you not simply run? She asked, the question that had haunted her since the first horn sounded. Surrender would have meant a far quicker death. Marcus considered the question for a long moment, glancing across the unconscious guards scattered around him, the broken pillar, the blood soaked into black sand that had swallowed 11 champions before he ever arrived. Because somewhere inside this empire, he said quietly, there are other humans locked in cells exactly like the one I walked out of this morning. And everyone in that crowd needed to witness with their own eyes exactly what happens when you assume something weaker than you has stopped learning how to survive. Sayla's breath caught in her throat. There are more of you, held prisoner. Several thousand, scattered across outposts your empire claimed during the border campaigns, Marcus said. Your records describe us as primitive, emotional, harmless in royal combat. I suspect those records will require some updating after today. The crowd above had begun murmuring again, differently now, the whispers carrying not fear but something approaching reluctant respect, the particular respect that spreads through conquered peoples the moment they witness proof that their conquerors can bleed exactly like everyone else. Sayla turned to address the entire silent amphitheater, her voice ringing out with newly discovered authority that left no room for argument. Release every human prisoner held within Valkyrie territory, she announced, effective immediately, by royal decree. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Drathos staggered backward, defeated by words rather than blades, which somehow felt far more humiliating than anything that had happened on the sand. Marcus watched her, something unreadable crossing his exhausted features. That's a dangerous decree for a princess to make, he said. My father is not the one who watched a single unarmed man defeat the royal guard, Sayla said. I suspect humanity was never the harmless species our records claimed. I suspect the galaxy simply never bothered watching closely enough to notice the truth. Marcus allowed himself something close to a genuine smile, the first since the gates had opened that morning. "Welcome to the part where everyone finally starts paying attention," he said. "It only gets stranger from here." Far above the arena, word was already spreading through encrypted channels across a dozen neighboring systems, carried by traders, diplomats, and quiet observers who had witnessed the impossible firsthand. Within days, the story of the Hollow Crown would reach species who had spent generations living beneath Velkari rule, species who had long quietly wondered whether the Empire's strength was truly as absolute as it claimed to be. They would hear about a human who walked unarmed into an execution arena and walked out having rewritten what the galaxy believed about an entire species. They would hear about patience mistaken for weakness, calm mistaken for fear, mercy mistaken for softness, and somewhere among the stars, in cells and outposts and forgotten corners of a vast, arrogant empire, other humans would hear the story too, and understand at last that the galaxy had finally learned the lesson Earth had taught its own predators centuries before. Humanity had never survived by being the strongest. Humanity survived because it taught everyone else exactly how dangerous patience could be.